And part of developing our craft is learning to use the tools and materials and the practices of an art form. And part of learning how to use your materials is using proper techniques so that when you're doing your artwork, your craftsmanship or your neatness is the best that it can be. So I want to show you today a couple tricks about using markers. One of the things that's different from markers, as with colored pencils or crayons, is that markers are wet. So if you've ever colored with a marker and accidentally made a hole in your paper, that's because the paper got too wet from the marker, the color from the marker. So I'm going to show you a couple tricks that'll help you stay within the lines if that's something that you're trying to accomplish, and one way to color with the marker so that it ends up looking nice and neat and keeps you from creating any holes in your paper. So when coloring with a marker, and we usually color smaller surfaces with marker unless we're going to add water with a paintbrush, because the markers are wet, they do run out of their color pretty quickly if you're using them to color a large surface. When coloring with crayons or colored pencils, a lot of times we color back and forth in this kind of a motion. Now with markers, that's actually not how you color. With markers, you want to use straight lines and going in one direction. You can use curved lines as well if you're doing something and want to try to make it look rounded. For today, we're just using the straight lines. But the one key thing to remember is always going in one direction, not back and forth like with a crayon or a colored pencil. And I'll show you what I mean. Another trick that I use with crayons, colored pencils, markers, painting, a lot of things that I use actually, when coloring, is I trace along the inside edge very carefully whatever shape that I'm coloring in. And that tracing along that edge is what keeps me, when I go to color this in, it keeps me from going outside the border into other sections of my picture. So once I've traced it like that, now when I go to fill in, I won't accidentally color outside the line because I have that nice border that I've created. And then as I'm coloring, I'm starting on one side and going to the other. And notice I'm picking my marker up every time I get to the other side. That's what's going to help keep your paper from getting too wet and creating those holes that we want to avoid. So even with longer areas like this, again, I first very carefully trace slowly along those edges, even along these edges here and here. And sometimes it helps, as you've seen me do it before, flip your paper upside down so that you can see better when you're coloring. And now, even though there's this big, huge thing, once I've traced the border, I really only need one line, and now this whole piece is colored in, just like that. So it's actually a lot faster that way. You're not going back and forth, and you have a nice even texture coverage of color, I should say. So especially this helps when you're using your lighter markers, say yellow. The yellow marker usually ends up getting dirty a lot. So again, tracing alongside the edge of whatever shape of the object is that you're coloring in. Then one quick line, the edge, and then one smooth line along the border, and boom, you've colored in your whole thing, and you get that even coverage. Unlike, let me show with a blue here, in the past, when you color like this, you can kind of see that it gets a little bit lighter in areas and darker in some areas, and my marker starts to run out because I'm going quickly and unevenly. And so now I have dark sections and light sections of where I colored. I've gone outside the line a little bit. So when you trace your border and you go nice and slow and neatly and then just use that one line to fill in, your area gets colored a lot smoother, more even, and you stay within the lines. So that's how we color with markers.